Americans eat hot wings with their hands. Whether it's ribs, tacos, fries, or pizza, dripping with grease. Nobody calls this uncivilized, but post a video of an Indian person eating rice with their hands, and suddenly it's a hygiene crisis. Rice with your hands. That's the line. So what's the actual rule? Because it's clearly not don't touch food. Indians seem dirty because they eat with their hands, but in reality, you've been doing it since the very first years of your life. Furthermore, both Indians and you were biologically designed to eat with your hands. But let me cook, we'll cover all of it in this video, so you will leave knowing who's really wrong in here. So let's this competition of manners versus instincts start. Before I get into why this triggers people, let me explain what's actually happening when Indians eat with their hands, because I promise you, it's not what the viral videos suggest. First, you wash your hands before and after. It's non-negotiable. It's been the baseline expectation from kids since the moment they can reach a sink. Second, you use your right hand only. The left hand stays out of the food entirely. Third, you use your fingertips, not your whole fist. The technique involves pressing rice and curry together into a small portion, then using your thumb to push it into your mouth. Your palm shouldn't be getting covered in food. If it is, you're doing it wrong. And fourth, there's a whole contamination etiquette system built around something called juta, which roughly translates to food that's been made impure by contact with someone's mouth. You don't bite something and pass it to someone else. You don't put a spoon in your mouth and then back into a shared dish. If you're sharing a drink, you pour it into your mouth without touching your lips to the container. These rules exist specifically to prevent the thing Westerners imagine is happening constantly. So no, the difference isn't etiquette versus no etiquette. There are actually two different etiquette systems, and one of them is visible to you while the other isn't. But that's not what people are reacting to when they see these videos. They're not thinking about technique or contamination rules. In Reddit threads where people are trying to articulate why hand eating bothers them, someone described seeing people grabbing and mixing random curries together, going hand to mouth, and digging back into a shared plate. While they tried saying that is not sanitary, we know they intend to say that's dirty. From that, we can see what's actually triggering the disgust here, and it's definitely not the hand-to-mouth part. They hate the idea that curry is getting under fingernails and between knuckles. They hate the mixing and the wetness, and it gets uglier. In those same threads, you'll find comments like Indians are known for being unclean and smelling bad, sitting right next to the hygiene concerns. The mask slips fast. What starts as I'm just worried about sanitation becomes those people are dirty in about 3 comments. But historically speaking, this targeted discrimination should not even be happening. Forks weren't always normal. In medieval Europe, eating with hands was standard practice, even among nobility. When forks started appearing, they were mocked. One Italian noblewoman who used a fork in the 11th century was criticized for her excessive delicacy. A traveler who brought fork habits to England was ridiculed for decades. Forks only became standard table equipment in Europe over the course of centuries, and even then, their adoption was uneven and class-marked. The idea that utensils equal civilization is a story that got told backward. The truth is, utensils became normalized, and then the story about civilization got attached to them after the fact. According to National Geographic's History of the Fork, its widespread adoption facilitated a shift away from dishes that favored drier consistencies and fewer sauces. In other words, the fork changed how Europeans ate and what Europeans ate. Cuisine evolved to fit the tool. Saucy, wet, hands-on dishes became less common in formal settings, precisely because the fork made them awkward. So when a Westerner looks at someone mixing rice and dal with their fingers and feels disgust, that reaction is the residue of a centuries-long process where European cuisine and European manners co-evolved. Everyone forgot that the starting point was arbitrary. Your gut feeling that wet food with hands is gross is a learned response, not a hygienic insight. But knowing that doesn't make the feeling go away. I'm sure you've seen these street food videos from India, and when these go viral, you can be sure that's not an accident. The videos you see online are specifically shot in those areas because they generate clicks. Of course they show the reality of India, but it's not the complete reality. It's like me picking and choosing a ghetto of Stockholm and saying, oh look, the reality of Sweden. Someone else who was claiming 30 years of eating street food across India wrote, street food videos from poor areas of India are typically posted online. This generates the most clicks, as hate against Indians is largely normalized. There are places all over India where street food is served hygienically.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
This is where most locals actually eat. This is the algorithm doing what algorithms do. Content that triggers disgust gets engagement. Content that triggers disgust at a group that's already stigmatized gets even more engagement, because the disgust is validated by existing stereotypes. So creators, whether intentionally or just following the metrics, keep filming in the locations most likely to generate that reaction. When you see those videos, you are not seeing India as a whole, but just a curated selection of India's poorest areas. What's worse is, These clickbaits are optimized for maximum Western discomfort, posted by accounts that know exactly what they're doing, and it works. In May 2025, a 15-second clip of an Indian-origin woman eating biryani with her hands on the London Underground went massively viral. She was also on a loud phone call. The food was aromatic, and the train was crowded. The responses split exactly how you'd expect. Some people focused on public transit etiquette, expecting her to address the smell and to lower her voice. Fair enough. Eating pungent food on a packed train while on a phone call violates norms that have nothing to do with race. The footage was edited, reposted, and framed as evidence of civilizational decline. The quiet part stopped being quiet. I should be honest about something here, because the counter-arguments aren't all bad faith. Public setting does matter. Eating a full curry meal on a packed train with no hand-washing facilities, while also on a loud phone call, violates multiple unwritten rules at once. The people who were annoyed by that specific situation weren't all closet racists. Some of them would have been just as annoyed at someone eating fish and chips the same way. There's also a distinction between eating with your hands and serving with your bare hands. A lot of the viral disgust content comes from street vendor videos, where food is being prepared and distributed, not from ordinary people eating at home. Eating with hands is normal. Serving food to strangers without gloves or utensils is a different question, and it's often a poverty and infrastructure question, more than a culture question. These are working class people, cooking in conditions shaped by decades of underinvestment in public infrastructure and food safety regulation. When Westerners watch those clips and conclude this is how Indians are, they're collapsing an entire country into its most economically marginalized citizens. It's not even just other countries looking down on them. India has its own vicious class hierarchies around food and eating. In some urban, upper-class Indian circles, eating with hands is considered low-class or village behavior. Spoons and forks became markers of education and sophistication, since the utensils are a direct inheritance from British colonial rule. The same shame that Western commenters try to impose from outside already exists inside, enforced by Indians against other Indians. Unfortunately, they're associating a practice with poverty and then treating poverty itself as a moral failing. The disgust is more about status than a hygiene problem. It's more about who looks developed and who looks backward. Be honest with yourself, there's a version of hand eating that doesn't bother you at all. You've probably eaten Ethiopian food with injera, hands only, and felt cultured doing it. You've torn apart lobster with bare fingers, butter running down your wrists, and called it a delicacy. But an Indian eating rice and dal with their hands, suddenly it's a hygiene issue. The feeling is real. I'm not asking you to pretend you don't have it, but that feeling is based on who you've been trained to see as clean and who you've been trained to see as dirty. And the training gets reinforced every time the algorithm serves you another viral clip from India's poorest streets. Because disgust drives clicks, consumed by an audience already primed to believe certain people are dirtier than others. Meanwhile, CDC data shows Americans wash their hands before meals at lower rates than after using public restrooms. The hygiene gap between cultures is a lot smaller than the disgust gap suggests. And after all that we've said, there is still a little detail we are left to address: the biology behind all of this. Ever saw a lion, a shark, or even a horse and thought they are way more adapted to life than you? A simple and fragile human are? Yes, of course our ability to communicate and manipulate the environment is what put us on top of the evolution race. And that last thing wouldn't be possible if it wasn't, because we possess one of the most impressively adapted limbs in the animal kingdom: the hands. If you look at it superficially, our hands aren't physically distinct from other monkeys. What's more, other monkeys' hands are much stronger and more impressive than ours. But you, friend of mine, just by mere fact of belonging to the human race, you have the most agile and useful hands of all the apes, and consequently, the most impressively useful hands in the entire animal kingdom, essentially making us capable of manipulating everything with them. And that is the key to how we surpass all other competitors in nature. Humans are capable not only of taking things from the earth, but also of shaping them, breaking them, rearranging them, creating new tools, replicating them, and improving them. In fact, if you think about it, I could even say that it's the only thing our species is really good at. I mean, clearly it's not true that we're the most intelligent species. This total dependence on our hands is what makes our brain resort to them as a first measure in everything we do. They are our instinct. You use them to balance your weight when you carry something. They're the first thing you put out in front of you when you're falling. And likewise, it's in your instinct and your basic programming as a human being to use your hands to grab food and bring it to your mouth. It's much easier than trying to eat on all fours, which we're not built to do, and tearing meat with our teeth, which they're not particularly good at either. Eating with your hands is natural, which is why when you were a baby, you used your hands to bring anything you thought might be food to your mouth. mouth. And trust me, you were most likely way more disgusting to look at than any Indian curry. Your parents spent hours of their lives trying to explain to you that in the society you were born into, you eat with cutlery because due to circumstances in life, you would otherwise look wild and archaic. And right there lies the key to understanding all this paraphernalia. By the way, I don't know what that word even means, but hey, doesn't it sound fancy? For a purist of Japanese chopsticks, you who eat with a fork will be as archaic and savage as an Indian who eats with his hands is to you. And surely for you who eat with a fork, a Japanese person who believes himself to be superior for using a technically more difficult utensil will be nothing more than obnoxious. The thing is, human beings, just as we have the instinct to use our hands whenever we can, also have the instinct to feel that our group, our community, our beliefs are the most valuable. And this is where we are all wrong. When I researched for this video, I saw many opinions, and I can summarize those of the Indians themselves as a battle between those who think not all Indians eat like this, only the uncivilized ones, and on the other hand, those who think those who don't eat with their hands like us don't really know anything about gastronomy. The only absolute truth behind the whole thing is that there is nothing wrong with eating with your hands, as that is literally why we have them in the first place, but also is that there is nothing wrong with eating with utensils, as these were invented for practical purposes and ended up becoming a small element, one of many, that make our cultures unique and interesting. Here at Rice Degree, our lesson for today is don't be an elitist. You are not superior to anyone else for eating with your hands, with cutlery, or with chopsticks. Anyone who thinks otherwise is not speaking the truth, but rather speaking from insecurity and rejection of difference, which is a characteristic trait of weak people, a trait I don't want my students to have. At the end of the day, if all the cultures on this big planet had the same little mannerisms, would it be any captivating in the first place?